Hey there, and welcome back to another journey through the ancient world. I'm so glad you've decided to join me tonight, whether you're settling in for sleep or just looking to escape the chaos of modern life for a while. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across the globe, sharing these timeless stories. If this kind of deep dive into ancient mythology helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you some peace. We have so many more stories waiting to be told, so many more worlds to explore together. Now, let's set the scene, shall we? Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning, check your phone, grab some coffee, maybe scroll through social media, deal with traffic, answer emails, attend meetings. It's the modern routine we all know so well. But what if, instead of being a regular person with regular problems, you were a god? What if your daily routine involved reshaping mountains, starting wars over minor slights, and having your breakfast served by nymphs who've been singing your praises for the last 3,000 years? Tonight, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of telling you about Greek mythology from the outside looking in, we're going to live it. We're going to spend a day in the life of a Greek god, experiencing their world through their eyes, feeling what it might be like to wield unlimited power while being surrounded by equally powerful, equally petty, equally dramatic family members who've been holding grudges since before humans learned to write. The ancient Greeks didn't see their gods as distant, benevolent figures watching over them from some unreachable heaven. No, their gods were intensely personal, incredibly flawed, and surprisingly relatable. They had the same emotions we do, the same desires, the same capacity for love and hatred and jealousy and pride. The only difference was that when Zeus had a bad day, cities burned. When Poseidon was in a mood, ships sank. When Hera felt betrayed, innocent people turned into cows. These weren't moral exemplars or perfect beings to aspire to. They were cosmic forces of nature, wrapped in very human personalities, and that made them simultaneously magnificent and terrifying. They could grant your deepest wish or destroy your entire bloodline. And the decision often came down to whether you'd remembered to sacrifice the right animal at the right temple on the right day. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step into Mount Olympus for a day. Let's see what it's really like to be immortal, all-powerful, and perpetually surrounded by family drama that makes your most dysfunctional holiday gatherings look like peaceful meditation retreats. The alarm doesn't ring on Mount Olympus. There are no clocks, no schedules, no urgent notifications demanding your immediate attention. Instead, you wake naturally as the first rays of dawn creep across the marble floors of your divine palace. And you remember, as you do every morning, that you are Apollo, god of the sun, music, prophecy, and about a dozen other things that mortals have decided to attribute to you over the centuries. But unlike your mortal counterparts who might hit the snooze button and steal another 10 minutes of sleep, you can't exactly delay sunrise. Millions of people across the Mediterranean are depending on you to drag that blazing chariot across the sky. And while you could theoretically sleep in and let the world stay dark for a few extra hours, the paperwork from your father Zeus would be absolutely insufferable. So you stretch, yawn, and pad barefoot across floors made of clouds solidified into something more comfortable than marble, but infinitely more impressive. Your palace isn't just a home, it's a statement. Every room is perfectly lit because, well, you're the god of light. Every surface reflects golden radiance that would blind mortals, but feels as natural to you as lamplight feels to them. The walls are decorated with lyres that play themselves, prophecies that write themselves across golden tablets, and artistic masterpieces that rearrange themselves based on your mood. Your first stop is the bathroom, and yes, even gods need bathrooms, though yours is slightly more elaborate than the average human facilities. The bathtub is carved from a single piece of amber, filled with water that's always the perfect temperature and infused with nectar that would grant immortality to any mortal who drank it. You use it to brush your teeth. The mirror reflects not just your appearance, but also glimpses of the future, though you've learned to ignore most of what you see there. Knowing that someone in Athens is going to spill wine on their chiton this afternoon isn't particularly useful information, and the really important prophecies have a way of making themselves known when the time is right. As you're getting dressed, choosing between robes that shimmer like sunlight on water and a more casual toga that merely glows with divine radiance, you can already hear the sounds of your household stirring to life. The muses are warming up their voices in the next wing over, and you can tell from the harmony that they're working on something new. Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, has been particularly inspired lately, probably working on another story about heroes doing heroic things and dying heroically. It's her favourite theme. Your breakfast is waiting for you in the main hall, and it's not cereal and coffee. Ambrosia, the food of the gods, sits golden and gleaming on plates that never need washing, accompanied by nectar in a cup that refills itself. To mortal senses, ambrosia would taste like the most perfect thing they could imagine, but to you, it just tastes like breakfast. Familiar, nourishing, faintly sweet with a hint of something that might be honey. If honey were made by bees that fed exclusively on sunshine and divine inspiration. While you eat, you review your schedule for the day, though schedule is a loose term when you're immortal. Time moves differently when you have infinite amounts of it. Your assistant, a minor deity, whose name you can never quite remember, but who's been with you for about 6 centuries, has laid out a list of your commitments. There's the sunrise, of course, which is non-negotiable. 3 temples in different cities are holding festivals in your honor, which means you should probably make some sort of appearance, even if it's just sending a sign or blessing someone's cattle with healthier offspring. Then there's a meeting with your father Zeus about some administrative details regarding a new hero who's been making quite a name for himself slaying monsters, and generally being heroic in that exhausting way heroes have. Zeus wants your opinion on whether this particular mortal deserves divine favor or divine testing. In your experience, the two often amount to the same thing. You've also got a consultation with the oracle at Delphi. She's been having visions again, and while prophecy is your domain, the visions themselves can be a bit intense for mortal minds to handle. You'll need to help her interpret what she's seeing and decide how much of it to share with the various kings and generals who come seeking guidance. It's a delicate balance, too much information, and they get paralyzed by the weight of knowing their fate, too little, and they make catastrophically bad decisions and then blame you when everything goes wrong. And somewhere in there, you need to find time to deal with your ongoing feud with your half-brother Hermes, who's been stealing your cattle again. It's not that you particularly need the cattle, but it's the principle of the thing. He does it because he knows it annoys you. You retaliate because you can't let it slide, and the cycle continues as it has for the last several millennia. It's family tradition at this point. But first, the sunrise. You finish your breakfast, say goodbye to your household staff, and make your way to the stables where your chariot waits. The horses that pull the sun across the sky aren't ordinary horses, obviously. They're creatures of living flame, their manes flowing like liquid fire, their hooves leaving trails of light wherever they step. They nicker softly when they see you, and you take a moment to stroke their necks, feeling the warmth that would incinerate any mortal, but feels pleasantly toasty to your divine skin. The chariot itself is a work of art, crafted by Hephaestus back when he was still speaking to most of the family. It's made of gold that never tarnishes, decorated with scenes of your various achievements, and equipped with reins that respond to your thoughts rather than your hands. The wheels turn with the sound of distant music, and the entire vehicle radiates the kind of light that makes mortal poets weep with inspiration and occasionally go blind. You climb aboard, take the reins, and with a gentle command, the horses leap into the sky. The sensation is indescribable, like flying and falling and soaring all at once. The wind whips through your hair, but it's not the harsh wind that mortals experience. It's the breath of the sky itself, welcoming you home. Below, the world spreads out like a map made real. You can see everything from this height, every city and village, every ship on the wine-dark sea, every shepherd tending his flocks in the mountains. And as your chariot rises, light spreads across the landscape like spilled wine, bringing colour back to a world that had been rendered in shades of silver and grey by your sister, Artemis's moon. The mortals below are beginning their own daily routines. Farmers are leading their animals to pasture. Fishermen are pushing their boats into the surf. Merchants are opening their shops and arranging their wares. They don't look up to wave at you because they can't see you directly. The light of your chariot would burn their eyes if they tried. But they feel your presence in the warmth on their faces, in the way the shadows retreat, in the simple fact that their world has light and therefore hope for another day. You guide your horses along their ancient path, a route you've travelled so many times you could do it in your sleep, if gods actually needed sleep. Up over the eastern mountains where the light catches on snow-capped peaks and turns them pink and gold, then across the broad expanse of the Mediterranean, where your light dances on the waves, and fishermen pause in their work to murmur quick prayers of gratitude. This is perhaps the most peaceful part of your day, these hours spent crossing the sky in solitude. No petitioners demanding favours, no family members starting drama, no mortals accidentally offending you in ways that require divine intervention. Just you, your horses, and the slow, steady work of bringing light to the world. But even this peaceful routine has its complications. As you pass over a particular stretch of coastline, you notice storm clouds gathering on the horizon, dark and ominous, and definitely not part of the weather pattern you and your fellow gods had agreed upon. Your uncle Poseidon is up to something, and given his recent mood, it's probably nothing good. You make a mental note to ask him about it later, though ask might not be the right word. Conversations between gods rarely involve simple questions and straightforward answers. There will be posturing and veiled threats and references to ancient grievances that mortals have long forgotten, but which remain as fresh as yesterday's wounds to immortal minds. The storm clouds are moving toward a cluster of fishing boats, small vessels filled with mortals who have no idea they're about to become pawns in whatever game Poseidon is playing. You could intervene, but that might escalate whatever conflict your uncle is pursuing. Or you could let nature take its course, but those fishermen probably have families, children who are counting on them to return home with the day's catch. Decisions like this are the burden of godhood that mortals never consider when they pray for divine power. Every choice you make ripples outward in ways you can't always predict. Save the fishermen, and you might offend Poseidon, who could retaliate by sending storms to disrupt the festival being held in your honor. Let them drown, and their families will curse your name. Their grief will poison the offerings at your temples, and their deaths will weigh on whatever passes for a divine conscience. In the end, you choose a middle path. You can't stop the storm without directly challenging Poseidon, but you can give the mortals a chance to save themselves. A sudden gust of wind fills their sails, pushing their boats towards shore with just enough speed to outrun the worst of the weather. They'll think it's luck or skill or the blessing of some minor sea deity. They'll never know that the god of the sun spent a moment of his morning looking out for fishermen he'll never meet and whose names he'll never know. And that, perhaps, is what mortals understand least about the gods. They imagine you as distant and aloof, concerned only with grand gestures and epic dramas. But the truth is, you notice everything. Every prayer whispered in the dark, every offering left on a humble shrine, every act of kindness or cruelty performed by mortals who think the gods aren't watching. You notice and you remember, and sometimes, when the cosmic balance allows it, you act. Not because you have to, but because even gods, in their own complicated way, care about the small, brief, fragile lives of the creatures who worship them. The sun climbs higher. Your chariot continues its eternal journey, and below, the world wakes up to another day of mortal joys and sorrows, never knowing how many small divine interventions make their lives possible. As the morning progresses and your chariot reaches its zenith, you become aware of the first complication of the day. A prayer, urgent and desperate, cuts through the general murmur of mortal supplications like a knife through silk. It's coming from Delphi, from your oracle, and the intensity of it makes you pause mid-flight, your horses snorting flames as they sense your sudden attention. The oracle is in the grip of a vision, and not a pleasant one. Through the connection that binds all oracles to their patron gods, you can feel her consciousness stretch thin, her mortal mind struggling to process images that were never meant for human comprehension. She sees cities burning, heroes falling, gods weeping tears that become rivers of sorrow, and threading through it all, a name that makes your divine blood run cold: Pandora. You curse under your breath, a sound like thunder rolling across a clear sky. Pandora's box, or more accurately, Pandora's jar, has been a source of cosmic anxiety for centuries. The container holds everything that makes mortal life difficult, painful, and brief. Disease, famine, war, despair, all the gifts that the gods in their infinite wisdom decided humanity needed to experience. It was supposed to remain sealed, a reminder rather than an active threat. But visions don't lie, especially not yours. Your first instinct is to abandon the sun's path entirely and race to Delphi, but you can't. Millions of mortals depend on daylight to conduct their daily business, and darkness in the middle of the day would cause panic, confusion, and probably several small wars, as various kings assumed it was an omen directed specifically at them. Instead, you send a fraction of your consciousness ahead, a technique that always gives you a splitting headache, but which allows you to be in two places at once. The oracle's chamber is exactly as you left it last month: dim, smoky, and filled with the kind of mystical atmosphere that mortals find deeply impressive and gods find mildly irritating. The oracle herself, a middle-aged woman named Pythia, who was chosen for her ability to handle divine visions without immediately going insane, is collapsed on her sacred tripod. Her eyes rolled back, her mouth moving soundlessly as she struggles to form words around the images flooding her mind. You manifest just enough of your presence to steady her, your light warming the chamber, and your voice resonating through her consciousness like music made audible. Breathe, you tell her, not aloud, but directly into her thoughts. Let the vision flow through you, don't try to hold it. Tell me what you see. Her voice, when it comes, is hoarse from strain. The jar, it's cracking, not broken, but damaged. Something is seeping out. Not everything, not yet, but enough. I see a plague starting in a small village near the coast. I see crops withering in fields that should be green. I see a war beginning over a marriage that should bring peace. This is bad. Not apocalyptically bad. Not yet. But definitely the kind of situation that requires immediate divine attention. The problem is that Pandora's jar falls under Zeus's jurisdiction, not yours. You can see the future, but you can't directly interfere with artifacts of that magnitude without causing a diplomatic incident that would make the Trojan War look like a minor disagreement. You withdraw your consciousness from Delphi with a promise to return soon, leaving the oracle with enough of your light to help her recover from the vision. Then you urge your horses to greater speed, racing across the sky toward Mount Olympus. Your father needs to know about this, and given Zeus's tendency to shoot first and ask questions later when he's concerned about cosmic stability, you want to be the one to tell him. Mount Olympus appears ahead of you like a mountain made of crystallized authority. It doesn't just rise from the earth, it dominates it, imposing its presence on the landscape in a way that makes mortal mountains look apologetic by comparison. The peak is wreathed in clouds that never quite obscure it, and those clouds spark with barely contained lightning, a sure sign that Zeus is in one of his moods. You guide your chariot to the divine stables, where your horses are immediately attended to by a small army of minor deities whose job it is to maintain the cosmic infrastructure that keeps the world running. They're efficient, invisible, and absolutely essential, though most mortals never realize they exist. It's like the ultimate customer service industry, if customer service involved maintaining the fundamental forces of reality. The Palace of Zeus is exactly what you'd expect from the king of the gods who has never heard of the concept of understatement. The doors are 40 feet tall and made of gold that's been polished to mirror brightness. The halls are lined with columns that stretch up beyond sight, and the ceiling is a living recreation of the night sky, complete with constellations that move in real time and occasionally rearrange themselves to spell out your father's name. You find Zeus in his throne room, which is less a room and more a cosmic space that happens to have walls. The throne itself is carved from a single piece of crystallized lightning, and it crackles with energy that would reduce any mortal to ash just by looking at it. Zeus is sprawled across it in the casual way that only someone with ultimate power can manage, examining what appears to be a petition scroll that's longer than most mortals are tall. "Father," you begin, but he holds up one hand without looking at you. "Let me guess," he says, his voice carrying the rumble of distant thunder. "Pandora's jar is compromised. There's trouble brewing in the mortal realm, and you think I should do something about it immediately. This is why conversations with Zeus are so frustrating. He's not actually omniscient, but he has an information network that makes the modern internet look like smoke signals. Every prayer, every offering, every whispered complaint from mortals filters up to him eventually, and he has an uncanny ability to piece together patterns before anyone else notices them. The oracle saw..." You start again. "The oracle saw the beginning of what mortals will eventually call their first true age of suffering," Zeus interrupts, finally looking at you with eyes that flash like lightning. "Plague, famine, war, despair, all the greatest hits. The jar isn't broken, but it's damaged enough that things are seeping out slowly rather than all at once. In some ways, that's worse, a quick catastrophe they could recover from. A slow decline will break their spirit. You settle into a chair that materializes for you, crafted from solidified sunlight and surprisingly comfortable. So what do we do about it?" Zeus laughs, and the sound echoes through the throne room like thunder rolling across mountains. "We? My dear son, this is where you learn one of the fundamental truths of godhood. Sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing at all." "Nothing?" You can't keep the incredulity out of your voice. "Father, mortals are going to suffer. Entire civilizations could fall." "Yes," Zeus agrees calmly. "They will. And from that suffering, they'll learn, they'll grow, they'll become stronger. Or they won't, and they'll disappear, making room for others who will. That's how the world works, Apollo. That's how it's always worked. This is the conversation you've been dreading since you first felt the oracle's vision, not because you disagree with Zeus entirely, but because you know he's partly right, and that makes it worse. The gods aren't cosmic babysitters. They're forces of nature, and nature can be cruel as easily as it can be kind. But we could minimize the damage, you argue, guide them, help them find solutions, and in doing so, rob them of the chance to find those solutions themselves, Zeus counters. "Tell me, son, what do you think mortals learn from being rescued by gods every time they face a crisis? You know the answer, and you hate it. That they don't need to be self-reliant. That someone else will always solve their problems." Exactly. We've already interfered too much in their development. Every time we step in to fix something, we make them a little more dependent, a little less capable of handling their own affairs. The smart ones, the ones who might actually make something of themselves, start spending all their time praying for divine intervention instead of working to improve their situation. The worst part is that you've seen this pattern yourself. Cities that receive too much divine favor tend to become complacent, their people assuming that the gods will always protect them. Meanwhile, cities that face hardship and overcome it through their own efforts often become stronger, more innovative, more capable of handling future challenges. So, we just watch, you ask? We sit here in our palaces and let them struggle and die. Zeus leans forward, his expression becoming more serious. We observe, we learn, and when the moment is right, when they've proven they can handle the responsibility, we guide them towards solutions. Not rescue them, guide them. There's a difference. A new voice cuts through the conversation like a blade through silk. How noble of you both, discussing mortal suffering like it's an academic exercise. You turn to see Athena entering the throne room, her armor gleaming, her expression grim. Your sister has never been one for small talk or diplomatic niceties, and her mood today seems particularly sharp. Sister, Zeus acknowledges her with a slight nod. I assume you've heard about the jar. I've heard, and I've been thinking. Athena moves to stand before the throne, her grey eyes flashing with the intensity that makes her simultaneously one of the most respected and most feared deities on Olympus. This isn't just about mortal development or cosmic balance. This is about precedent. Zeus raises an eyebrow. Explain. Every time we face a crisis like this, we have the same conversation. Do we intervene or don't we? Do we save them or let them save themselves? And every time, we make a decision based on our individual philosophies rather than any consistent divine policy. The result is chaos. She's right, and you know it. Poseidon intervenes when he feels like it, usually when he's angry. Aphrodite meddles in mortal affairs constantly, but only in matters of love and beauty. Ares encourages warfare when he's bored. Artemis protects her hunters, but ignores everyone else. There's no coordination, no overarching strategy, just a collection of powerful beings acting on their individual impulses. What do you suggest? Zeus asks, and you can tell from his tone that he's genuinely interested in her answer. A council, Athena replies, without hesitation. Not just the 12 Olympians, but representatives from all the divine factions. We establish clear guidelines for divine intervention. We create protocols for situations like this. We stop treating mortal civilization like our personal playground and start treating it like what it is, a developing society that deserves consistent, rational guidance. The throne room falls silent, except for the distant rumble of thunder that always accompanies Zeus's deep thoughts. It's not a bad idea, actually. The gods have been operating without any real structure for millennia, each deity pursuing their own interests, without much consideration for how their actions affect the broader divine community or the mortal realm. But you also know your father, and you can see the objections forming in his mind before he voices them. And who, Zeus asks slowly, would enforce these guidelines? Who would have the authority to tell Poseidon to stop sinking ships, or Hera to stop turning mortals into animals out of jealousy? Athena smiles, and it's not entirely pleasant. You would, father. You're the king of the gods. Start acting like it. Sire, the temperature in the throne room drops several degrees, and the lightning in the clouds outside becomes more frequent. When Zeus is truly angry, reality itself starts to feel unstable, as if the fundamental forces that hold the world together are reconsidering their allegiances. But then, slowly, Zeus begins to laugh. Not the thunder-rolling laughter from before, but something quieter, more thoughtful. You know, daughter, that's either the best idea anyone's had in centuries, or it's going to start a war that will make the Titanomachy look like a friendly disagreement. Probably both, Athena admits. But the alternative is continuing to muddle through crises without any plan, watching mortal civilizations rise and fall based on whichever god happens to be paying attention that decade. At least with a structured approach, They'd have some consistency to work with. You find yourself nodding despite your reservations. It might actually help with the current situation. If we had clear protocols for handling artifacts like Pandora's jar, we wouldn't be sitting here debating whether to act while mortals suffer. Zeus stands, his massive frame unfolding from the throne like a storm taking shape. Very well, we'll convene a full divine assembly, every god, goddess, titan, and major spirit. We'll hash out these guidelines, establish these protocols, and see if we can bring some order to the cosmic chaos we call divine governance. He pauses, looking directly at you. But first, son, you need to finish your daily route. The sun doesn't set itself, and if mortals are going to face increased hardship in the coming months, they'll need all the light and warmth they can get. Right, the job. Sometimes you forget that being a god involves actual responsibilities beyond family drama and cosmic politics. You stand, bow respectfully to both Zeus and Athena, and head back toward the stables where your horses are waiting, probably wondering why their schedule has been disrupted by divine bureaucracy. As you harness them again and prepare to complete the sun's journey across the sky, you reflect on the strange nature of godhood. Mortals imagine that unlimited power would solve all problems, make life simple and straightforward. They don't realize that power without wisdom is just chaos with better special effects, and that even gods struggle with questions of right and wrong, action and inaction, individual desire and collective responsibility. Your horses leap back into the sky, and you guide them westward, chasing the afternoon toward its inevitable conclusion. Below, mortals continue their daily routines, unaware that their fate is being debated in palaces made of crystallized light, unaware that the very gods they worship are struggling with the same fundamental questions that have plagued thinking beings since consciousness first looked up at the stars and wondered why. The sun moves across the sky because you make it move. But who moves you? And when the gods themselves need guidance, where do they turn? These are the questions that follow you as you complete your circuit, guiding daylight across the world while wrestling with problems that have no easy answers, no clear solutions, no guarantee that even divine wisdom will be enough to see everyone through the darkness ahead. The afternoon brings its own complications, as afternoons always do when you're responsible for keeping the sun on schedule, while managing a divine social calendar that would make a modern celebrity's assistant weep with exhaustion. You're somewhere over the Aegean Sea, watching fishing boats navigate between islands like ants following invisible trails, when you feel the familiar tug of a prayer that demands immediate attention. It's coming from a temple in Corinth, and the emotional intensity behind it makes your horses flicker with sympathetic flame. Someone is desperate, truly desperate, in the way that only mortals can be when they've exhausted every other option and turn to the gods as their final hope. The prayer carries the particular flavor of a parent's anguish, sharp and clean and utterly devastating to divine senses that are calibrated to detect human suffering across vast distances. You could ignore it. Gods receive thousands of prayers every day, and most of them are routine requests for good weather, successful harvests, or help finding lost sheep. But this one is different. This one tastes like genuine need rather than casual want. And despite your father's philosophical stance on divine intervention, you've never been able to completely ignore that particular flavor of mortal desperation. With a mental command, you send a fragment of your consciousness spiraling down toward Corinth while keeping the majority of your attention focused on guiding the sun. It's like having a conversation while solving a complex mathematical equation, possible but exhausting. The temple is modest by divine standards, just a simple stone structure with your symbol carved above the entrance, and a bronze statue that bears only a passing resemblance to your actual appearance. The sculptor clearly had more enthusiasm than skill, but the devotion behind the offering is genuine, and that matters more than artistic accuracy. Inside, a woman kneels before your altar, her hands pressed against stone worn smooth by countless other supplicants, She's middle-aged, dressed in the simple clothes of a merchant's wife, and her face carries the particular exhaustion that comes from weeks of sleepless nights. Beside her lies a young man, perhaps 20 years old, unconscious and burning with fever despite the cool water that's been repeatedly poured over his body. Her son. The knowledge comes to you instantly, along with the rest of their story. A fever that started 3 days ago. A sickness that none of the local healers can identify or treat. The boy is dying, and his mother has spent her family's savings on remedies that haven't worked, sacrifices that haven't been answered, and increasingly desperate prayers to any god who might be listening. Now she's here, in your temple, because someone told her that Apollo is the god of healing, as well as music and prophecy. Someone told her that if anyone can save her son, it's you. And she's praying with the kind of intensity that would burn through the consciousness of a lesser deity, offering everything she has, everything she is, everything she might ever be, in exchange for her child's life. The problem is that healing isn't really your primary domain. That belongs to your son Asclepius, who inherited your medical knowledge and refined it into something approaching an art form. But Asclepius is currently dealing with a plague outbreak in Egypt, and even if he weren't, divine protocol requires that prayers be answered by the god they're addressed to, not passed along to someone more qualified. You examine the boy more closely, letting your divine senses penetrate beyond the physical symptoms to the underlying cause. It's not a natural illness, you realize with growing concern. Someone has cursed this family, and not with amateur magic or local hedge witchery. This is sophisticated divine malice, the kind that requires significant power and considerable skill to implement properly. The curse is designed to look like a wasting disease, something that would kill slowly while appearing entirely natural. But you can see the magical threads woven through the boy's life force, systematically shutting down his body's ability to fight off infection. It's elegant, subtle, and absolutely lethal. Without divine intervention, he'll be dead by sunset. The question is, who cursed him and why? You expand your consciousness, tracing the magical signature backward through time, like following a river to its source. The trail leads through the family's recent history, touching on business dealings, social interactions, romantic entanglements. The boy is unmarried, but not unattached. There was a girl, a merchant's daughter from a rival family, and there was a courtship that ended badly when her father arranged a more advantageous marriage. Ah, there it is. The girl's new mother-in-law, a woman with connections to certain mystery cults and access to the kind of curse work that can kill from a distance. She didn't appreciate having her family's social advancement threatened by a young man's inconvenient romantic attachment, so she decided to remove the obstacle permanently. This is exactly the kind of situation that makes divine governance so complicated. The curse is unjust, but it's also a private matter between mortal families. Intervening would save an innocent life, but it would also set a precedent that gods should involve themselves in every petty human dispute. On the other hand, allowing the curse to succeed would mean letting murder go unpunished simply because the weapon was magical rather than physical. You make your decision with the part of your mind that isn't currently steering the sun across the sky. Justice, after all, is supposed to be one of your domains, even if it doesn't get as much attention as music and prophecy. The curse unravels under your divine touch, like a knot being patiently teased apart by expert fingers. You don't simply break it, which would be crude and potentially dangerous to the boy's already weakened system. Instead, you carefully reverse its effects, allowing his natural healing processes to reassert themselves gradually. The woman at your altar gasps as her son's breathing becomes less labored, as the fever breaks and healthy color returns to his face. She looks up at your statue, with tears streaming down her cheeks, whispering thanks that taste like honey and wine to your divine senses. But you're not finished. The person who cast this curse needs to understand that attempted murder through magical means, carries consequences. Even when the target is just a mortal merchant's son, you can't directly punish her without causing a diplomatic incident with whichever mystery cult she's affiliated with. But you can certainly make sure she understands that her actions have been noticed. That night, she'll dream of standing trial before a court of divine judges, with evidence of her crime laid out in excruciating detail. She'll wake knowing that the gods are watching her, that her secret cruelties are not as secret as she believed. It won't stop her from being the kind of person who curses innocent young men, but it might make her think twice before acting on those impulses again. By the time you withdraw your consciousness from Corinth, the sun has traveled significantly further west, and you're running behind schedule. Your horses sense your urgency and increase their pace without being asked, their flaming manes streaming behind them like banners made of light. This is the reality of divine existence that mortals never consider when they pray for godhood. Every answered prayer creates a dozen new complications. Every act of intervention raises questions about consistency, fairness, and the proper role of divine authority in mortal affairs. Every decision to help someone inevitably means deciding not to help someone else, because even gods have limited time and attention. As you guide your chariot over the Italian peninsula, you become aware of another complication brewing on the horizon, literally on the horizon, in the form of storm clouds that definitely weren't there this morning, and definitely don't belong in today's weather pattern. Your uncle Poseidon is making a statement, and given the size and intensity of the storm system he's building, it's going to be a loud one. The clouds are the kind of ominous black that makes experienced sailors turn their ships toward the nearest port and farmers start moving their livestock to higher ground. Lightning flickers in their depths, but it's the wrong color, too green and too bright, which means these aren't natural weather patterns. You extend your senses toward the storm, trying to understand what's triggered your uncle's temper now. Poseidon has many moods, most of them inconvenient for mortals who depend on the sea for their livelihood, but his storms usually have specific targets. He doesn't generally create indiscriminate weather disasters just for the entertainment value. The answer comes to you through the complex web of divine awareness that connects all the Olympians. A fishing fleet from Athens has been using new techniques that Poseidon considers disrespectful to the sea. They've been employing larger nets, deeper fishing methods, and apparently making jokes about how easy it is to trick fish into swimming into their traps. From a mortal perspective, it's innovation and efficiency. From Poseidon's perspective, it's arrogance and disrespect toward the creatures under his protection. The storm is his way of reminding them that the sea gives its bounty by choice, not by right, and that mortals who take too much without proper gratitude might find themselves taking an unplanned swimming lesson. The problem is that the storm system Poseidon is building won't just affect the offending fishing fleet. Weather patterns don't recognize moral boundaries, and a storm that size will impact dozens of coastal communities, many of which have done nothing to earn divine displeasure except having the misfortune to live near the sea. You could try to negotiate with Poseidon, god to god, but that would require abandoning your solar duties and flying directly into a storm system that's specifically designed to be hostile to other forms of divine energy. Your light-based powers and his water-based abilities don't mix well under the best of circumstances, and these are definitely not the best of circumstances. Instead, you opt for a more subtle approach. As your chariot passes over the coastline, you allow some of your light to penetrate the growing storm clouds, not enough to dispel them, but enough to create gaps, pockets of calmer weather that will give smart sailors a chance to navigate to safety. It's not perfect, but it's better than doing nothing. The modification to Poseidon's storm system doesn't go unnoticed. You feel his attention focus on you like a weight pressing down from above. And when he speaks, his voice carries the sound of waves crashing against cliffs. "Nephew," he says, his tone carrying approximately the same warmth as deep ocean water in winter. "I don't recall asking for your assistance with weather management." "Uncle," you reply, keeping your own tone carefully neutral. I don't recall you asking the other coastal communities for their opinions on your fishing fleet discipline either. Wait. There's a pause that stretches just long enough to become uncomfortable, filled with the sound of wind and distant thunder. When Poseidon speaks again, there's a note of something that might be amusement in his voice. Fair point. But the Athenians have been growing too bold, too confident in their mastery over my domain. They need reminding that the sea is not their servant. Agreed, you say, because arguing with Poseidon when he's in this mood is like trying to negotiate with a tsunami. But perhaps the reminder could be more targeted. The fishing fleet that offended you is currently about 15 miles northwest of your main storm center. The communities that are about to be flooded haven't done anything except build their homes near water. Another pause, shorter this time, followed by what sounds like divine laughter mixed with the roar of ocean waves. You know what, nephew? You're right. Why punish the innocent when you can educate the guilty more directly? The storm system shifts, contracting and intensifying as it moves away from the populated coastline toward the open sea, where the offending fishing fleet is currently trying to haul in their latest catch. You watch through divine senses as experienced fishermen suddenly find themselves dealing with waves that shouldn't exist and winds that seem to be blowing from multiple directions simultaneously. No one will die, you realize as you observe Poseidon's handiwork. The storm is designed to be terrifying rather than lethal, a divine object lesson in respect for the sea and its creatures. The fishermen will lose their nets, probably some of their catch, and definitely their confidence in their new techniques. But they'll survive to tell the story. And other fishing fleets will hear that story and perhaps reconsider their own approaches to harvesting the sea's bounty. It's actually rather elegant as divine punishments go. Educational rather than destructive. Memorable rather than fatal. The kind of intervention that teaches lessons without creating martyrs or blood feuds that last for generations. Well handled, uncle, you tell Poseidon, and you mean it. I have my moments, he replies, and you can hear the satisfaction in his voice. Now finish your route before Zeus starts complaining about irregular daylight patterns. I have some fishing boats to educate, the divine equivalent of a dismissal, but a friendly one. You urge your horses onward, guiding them through the afternoon sky as the sun continues its ancient journey from east to west. Below, the world continues its daily rhythm of mortal concerns and divine influences, most of which go unnoticed by the people whose lives they shape. This is the paradox of godhood that mortals never quite grasp when they imagine what it would be like to have unlimited power. Every action has consequences. Every intervention creates new problems. Every decision to help someone requires a decision not to help someone else. The gods aren't distant and uncaring. They're overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of managing a world full of mortals who all have different needs, different desires, and different ideas about what constitutes fair treatment. And yet, somehow it works. The sun rises and sets, the seasons change, the tides ebb and flow, and mortal civilization continues to stumble forward through its endless cycles of growth and decline, war and peace, wisdom and folly. Not because the gods have perfect judgment or unlimited patience, but because they care enough to keep trying, keep balancing, keep making the difficult choices that come with cosmic responsibility. As your chariot approaches the western horizon, you reflect on the strange nature of a day in the life of a god. You've prevented a plague, negotiated a storm, healed a dying boy, and helped establish the framework for better divine governance. By mortal standards, it's been an extraordinarily productive day. By divine standards, it's been fairly typical. The sun sets because you guide it below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that inspire poets and make lovers pause in their evening walks. But tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all again, because that's what gods do. They show up, they do the work, and they try to make the world a little better than they found it, one sunrise at a time. Even when nobody's watching, even when nobody says thank you, even when the mortals they're protecting have no idea how much divine intervention goes into making their ordinary days possible. That, perhaps, is the most human thing about the gods. They keep going anyway. The western horizon approaches like a familiar friend you're always slightly sad to see, because it means another day of cosmic responsibility is drawing to a close. Your horses sense the approaching end of their route and begin to slow their pace naturally, their flames dimming from the brilliant white-hot intensity of midday to the warmer, softer golds and crimsons that mortals associate with sunset. This is perhaps your favorite part of the daily journey. These final hours when your light becomes gentle enough that mortals can look directly at your chariot without risking their eyesight. They gather on rooftops and hillsides to watch you pass, children pointing at the sky and making wishes, lovers holding hands as they watch the day fade into evening, elderly people sitting in comfortable silence as they reflect on another day, survived in a world that's never quite as safe as it pretends to be. From your position high above the Mediterranean, you can see the entire scope of mortal civilization spread out like a living map. Cities glow with the warm light of cooking fires and oil lamps. Roads connect settlements like veins carrying the lifeblood of commerce and communication. And everywhere you look, humans are engaged in the endless, exhausting, beautiful work of simply being alive. A merchant in Athens is closing his shop for the day, counting the coins he's earned and wondering if there'll be enough to buy his daughter the wedding dress she's dreamed of. A fisherman in Crete is mending nets by lamplight, his hands moving with the automatic precision that comes from decades of practice, while his wife prepares a simple dinner of bread and olives and the day's catch. A young mother in Sparta is singing her baby to sleep with a lullaby her own mother sang to her, the melody carrying across generations like a thread connecting past and future. They don't know you're watching, these mortals living their small, precious lives in the shadow of gods and monsters and cosmic forces beyond their understanding. They don't realize that every sunset is a deliberate act of divine will, that the light fading from their sky is being carefully guided by a god who has been performing this same ritual for longer than their civilizations have existed. And perhaps that's for the best. Mortals have enough to worry about without adding the weight of divine observation to their daily concerns. They need to believe that their private moments are truly private, that their quiet sorrows and secret joys belong to them alone. It's one of the small mercies the gods can offer. The illusion of privacy in a world where nothing truly goes unnoticed. As your chariot descends toward the western edge of the world, you become aware of movement in the divine realm below. Mount Olympus is stirring with unusual activity, and you can sense the gathering of divine consciousness that means a formal assembly is being called. Your father, it seems, has taken Athena's suggestion seriously and is moving quickly to implement her proposed reforms. The timing is inconvenient, as divine timing often is. You still have another hour of sunset duties to complete, and abandoning them would leave the Western Mediterranean in premature darkness. But you can feel Zeus's summons pressing against your consciousness like a polite but insistent knock on a door, and ignoring a direct command from the king of the gods is generally considered poor career planning, even when you're technically immortal. You solve the problem the way gods have always solved scheduling conflicts, by being in multiple places at once. It's exhausting and gives you the divine equivalent of a headache, but it's better than choosing between your cosmic responsibilities and your family obligations. Part of your consciousness remains with the chariot, guiding your horses through their final approach while maintaining the gradual dimming of light that creates the gentle transition from day to night. The other part of your awareness manifests in the great assembly hall of Mount Olympus, a space so vast and architecturally impossible that mortal minds would refuse to process it properly. The hall is already filling with divine beings of every rank and description. The 12 Olympians occupy their traditional positions around Zeus's throne, but tonight they're joined by titans who haven't left their distant prisons in centuries. Nature spirits who rarely venture from their forests and rivers, and minor deities whose names mortals have forgotten, but whose functions remain essential to the operation of the world. Hades is here, which is unusual enough to cause whispered conversations among the lesser gods. The Lord of the Underworld rarely attends family gatherings, preferring the quiet dignity of his shadowy realm to the political chaos of Olympus. His presence suggests that whatever Zeus is planning, it's serious enough to require input from all three brothers who divided the world among themselves after overthrowing their father. Poseidon has arrived still damp from his recent stormcrafting activities, seawater dripping from his beard and pooling around his feet in a way that would be concerning if this weren't a divine palace built to withstand considerably more dramatic displays of elemental power. He nods to you as your consciousness settles into the assembly, a gesture of acknowledgement between professionals who understand the complexities of managing cosmic forces while dealing with family politics. Your stepmother Hera sits beside Zeus's throne, her expression carefully neutral in the way that suggests she's either plotting something elaborate or genuinely curious about the proceedings. With Hera, those two states are often indistinguishable, and both are potentially dangerous for everyone involved. Athena stands before the assembled deities like a general addressing troops before battle, her armor gleaming with the kind of light that suggests she's prepared for this discussion to become significantly more heated than a typical family meeting. She's surrounded by scrolls, tablets, and what appears to be a comprehensive organizational chart that maps out every divine relationship and area of responsibility in excruciating detail. Brothers, sisters, cousins, and honored guests, Zeus begins, his voice carrying easily through the vast space without seeming to strain. We are gathered tonight to address a question that has been troubling our family for millennia. How do we govern the mortal realm consistently, fairly, and without accidentally destroying the very civilizations we're meant to protect? A murmur runs through the assembly, the divine equivalent of nervous laughter. Everyone present has, at some point, made decisions that seemed reasonable from a cosmic perspective, but resulted in unintended consequences for mortals. It's the occupational hazard of wielding power over beings whose lives are so brief and fragile that even minor divine interventions can reshape their entire existence. The immediate catalyst for this assembly, Zeus continues, is the situation developing around Pandora's jar. As many of you are aware, the containment has been compromised, and various forms of mortal suffering are beginning to seep into the world at an accelerated rate. Hermes raises his hand, a gesture that somehow manages to be both respectful and slightly impatient. Father, with respect, hasn't mortal suffering always been part of the design? I mean, we put it in the jar in the first place for a reason. True, Zeus acknowledges, but the current situation is uncontrolled. Instead of the measured educational hardships we intended, mortals are facing random catastrophes with no clear moral lesson attached. Plagues are striking virtuous communities while corrupt cities prosper. Wars are breaking out over misunderstandings rather than genuine grievances. The suffering has become meaningless, and meaningless suffering serves no divine purpose. Aphrodite, who's been examining her reflection in a hand mirror throughout the discussion, looks up with sudden interest. Are we talking about intervening directly? Because I have some thoughts about certain mortals who could use divine guidance in matters of love, and that, Athena interrupts firmly, is exactly the kind of ad hoc decision-making that got us into this situation. We can't have individual gods intervening whenever they feel like it based on personal whims or temporary interests. My interventions are not whims, Aphrodite protests, her voice carrying the dangerous sweetness that usually precedes someone being transformed into a tree or a small woodland creature. Love is a fundamental force of nature. When I guide mortals toward appropriate romantic connections, I'm serving the cosmic order. By appropriate connections, do you mean the married king you made fall in love with his best friend's wife last month? Artemis asks dryly, because that particular intervention resulted in a civil war that's still ongoing. That's not... Aphrodite begins, but Zeus cuts her off with a gesture that makes the air itself seem to hold its breath. This, he says, is precisely why we need structure, protocols, and clear lines of authority. Every god in this room has their own definition of appropriate intervention, and those definitions don't always align with each other or with the broader needs of mortal civilization. Hades speaks for the first time since the assembly began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that comes from spending eternity managing the ultimate consequences of mortal decisions. The problem isn't that we intervene. The problem is that we don't coordinate our interventions. When Aphrodite causes a war through romantic manipulation, Ares encourages it because he enjoys conflict, while Athena tries to minimize casualties through strategic guidance, and Apollo provides prophecies that may or may not help anyone make better decisions. The mortals caught in the middle receive contradictory divine guidance and assume we're either incompetent or actively malicious. "I'm never incompetent," Ares mutters, which earns him looks from several other deities that suggest they have different opinions on that subject. The point, Hades continues, ignoring his brother's interjection, is that mortals need consistency. They need to understand what kinds of behavior earn divine favor and what kinds invite divine punishment. Right now, they're operating on incomplete information because we've never bothered to establish clear, universal guidelines. Demeter, who has been quietly growing small flowers in the cracks between marble tiles while listening to the discussion, raises her head with an expression of concern. But if we establish universal guidelines, doesn't that limit our ability to respond to unique situations? Not every moral dilemma fits into a neat category, and some mortals face circumstances that require creative solutions. It's a valid point, and one that highlights the fundamental tension between divine authority and divine compassion. Gods are meant to be forces of nature, operating according to eternal principles that don't bend to accommodate individual circumstances. But they're also, in their own way, deeply invested in the welfare of the mortals who worship them, and sometimes that investment requires flexibility that rigid guidelines don't allow. Athena steps forward, her organizational charts rustling in a breeze that seems to blow from the direction of pure logic. That's why I propose a tiered system of intervention. Level 1 would cover routine matters that individual gods can handle according to their established domains, using standardized approaches that mortals can learn to predict and plan around. Level 2 would involve situations requiring coordination between multiple deities, with mandatory consultation before any action is taken. Level 3 would be reserved for existential threats to mortal civilization, requiring unanimous consent from the Olympian Council before implementation. And who decides which level a situation falls into? Poseidon asks, his tone suggesting he already knows he won't like the answer. A rotating committee of 3 gods, selected quarterly, with no god serving consecutive terms, and no more than 1 god from the same domain serving simultaneously. Athena replies, without hesitation. Decisions would be made by majority vote, with appeals possible to the full Olympian Council in cases of significant disagreement. The silence that follows this proposal is the kind of silence that usually precedes either enthusiastic agreement or the kind of argument that results in mountains being relocated and rivers changing course. Hermes clears his throat diplomatically. Sister, that's very thorough. But don't you think it might slow down our response time to urgent situations? I mean, if mortals are dying while we're scheduling committee meetings. Mortals are already dying because of our uncoordinated responses, Athena counters. At least with a structured approach, they'd be dying for consistent reasons rather than random ones. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement of the plan, you find yourself saying. your consciousness flickering between the assembly and your ongoing sunset duties? And what about situations that require immediate action? Natural disasters, plague outbreaks, divine artifacts malfunctioning. Sometimes waiting for committee approval means accepting unnecessary casualties. Zeus nods thoughtfully. A fair concern, Apollo. What would you suggest as an alternative? You take a moment to consider, aware that your answer might influence divine policy for the next several millennia. Emergency protocols, pre-approved responses to common crisis types, with designated first responders for each category. Natural disasters could be handled immediately by the relevant elemental deities, with notification to the committee after the fact. Medical emergencies could be addressed by healing gods without prior consultation. Military conflicts. Well, those are more complicated. But perhaps we could establish rules of engagement that prevent divine participation from escalating mortal disputes beyond reasonable proportions. Reasonable proportions being defined how exactly? Ares asks, his interest clearly piqued by any discussion that might affect his ability to encourage warfare. No involvement in conflicts between fewer than, say, 10,000 combatants, you suggest. Smaller wars can be resolved by mortals themselves. Larger ones risk becoming existential threats to entire civilizations and therefore warrant divine attention. What about conflicts that start small but have the potential to grow larger? Athena asks. The Trojan War began with 1 woman and 2 men, but it eventually involved every major city-state in the Greek world. Ongoing assessment, Hera suggests unexpectedly. Monthly reviews of all active conflicts, with escalation protocols when situations reach predetermined thresholds. It's not perfect, but it's better than our current approach of wait until someone asks for help and then argue about whether to provide it. The discussion continues, with various deities proposing modifications, exceptions, and alternative approaches to divine governance. Some suggestions are practical, some are self-serving, and some are clearly designed to maintain each god's ability to interfere in mortal affairs whenever they feel like it. But gradually, a framework begins to emerge, a structure that balances the need for consistency with the reality that gods are fundamentally individuals with their own personalities, priorities, and areas of expertise. Meanwhile, in the part of your consciousness that's still guiding the sun toward the western horizon, you're approaching the final phase of your daily journey. The light has dimmed to the warm, golden glow that mortals find comforting rather than overwhelming, and the sky is beginning to show the first hints of the deep blues and purples that herald the approach of night. Your sister Artemis is already preparing for her own nocturnal duties, her silver chariot visible in the distance as she waits for you to complete your route so she can begin hers. The transition from day to night is one of the few divine collaborations that has always worked smoothly, perhaps because both of you understand that mortal civilization depends on the regular alternation of light and darkness, work and rest, activity and reflection. As your horses begin their final descent, carrying the sun below the edge of the world, you reflect on the strange nature of divine existence. Mortals often imagine that unlimited power would make life simple, that gods must spend their time in perfect contentment, free from worry or uncertainty, or the need to make difficult decisions. The reality, as tonight's assembly demonstrates, is considerably more complicated. Power without wisdom is just chaos with better special effects, and even cosmic authority doesn't eliminate the need for negotiation, compromise, and the occasional heated family argument about proper procedure. The sun sets because you guide it below the horizon, but who guides you? Tonight, you're part of an attempt to answer that question, to create structures that will help the gods govern themselves, as well as the mortal realm. Whether it will work remains to be seen, but at least it's an acknowledgement that even divine beings need rules, guidelines, and the occasional reminder that with great power comes great responsibility to use that power wisely. Your horses touch down in the divine stables as the last rays of sunlight fade from the mortal sky, and you allow your consciousness to fully return to the assembly hall, where the debate continues. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and guide the sun across the sky again. But hopefully you'll do so as part of a more coordinated, more thoughtful approach to divine governance. The gods are learning, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, that being immortal doesn't exempt them from the need to grow, to change, to become better at the job they've been doing for millennia. It's a lesson that mortals learned long ago out of necessity, and perhaps it's time for their gods to catch up. After all, if you're going to be responsible for the fate of entire civilizations, you might as well try to do it properly. As the divine assembly gradually reaches a consensus on the framework for coordinated intervention, you find yourself thinking about the practical implications of what's being proposed. It's one thing to create committees and protocols in the abstract perfection of Mount Olympus, but quite another to implement them in the messy, complicated reality of mortal affairs. The truth is, most divine interventions aren't the grand, dramatic gestures that poets love to sing about. They're small adjustments, minor course corrections, the kind of subtle influences that mortals never notice, but which keep their world from sliding into complete chaos. A favourable wind that fills a fisherman's nets, a sudden inspiration that helps a farmer choose the right field to plant, a moment of clarity that prevents a king from making a decision that would doom his people. These are the real tools of divine governance, and they don't fit neatly into any organizational chart. You're pulled from these reflections by the sound of Zeus calling for a preliminary vote on Athena's proposed framework. It's not a final decision, but rather an indication of whether the assembled gods think the general approach is worth refining further. The alternative, as everyone in the room understands, is maintaining the current system of divine anarchy and hoping that things somehow work out better in the future. The vote is closer than you expected. The major Olympians are split almost evenly, with the nature spirits and minor deities providing the deciding margin in favour of attempting structured governance. It's not exactly a ringing endorsement, but it's enough to move forward with developing specific protocols and procedures. As the assembly begins to break up into smaller working groups, each tasked with developing guidelines for different aspects of divine intervention, you excuse yourself and step out onto one of the palace's many terraces. The night air is cool and clear, filled with the kind of perfect silence that only exists in divine realms, where the normal sounds of wind and weather are optional rather than inevitable. From this vantage point, you can see the entire mortal world spread out below, like a tapestry woven from light and shadow. Cities glow with the warm radiance of oil lamps and cooking fires, while the spaces between settlements remain dark, except for the occasional traveller's torch moving along ancient roads like a firefly wandering through tall grass. It's beautiful, this world that mortals have built under divine guidance, and in spite of divine interference. They've created art and music and poetry that sometimes surpass even the works of the gods. They've developed systems of law and governance that, while imperfect, at least attempt to balance individual desires with collective needs. They've learned to heal diseases, to predict weather patterns, to navigate by the stars, and to pass knowledge from one generation to the next through the revolutionary technology of written language. And they've done most of it while having no clear idea what their gods actually want from them. The more you think about it, the more remarkable mortal civilization becomes. They've built their entire society on incomplete information, conflicting divine messages, and the assumption that the beings they worship are basically rational actors with consistent moral frameworks. The fact that they've accomplished anything at all under those circumstances suggests a resilience and adaptability that even gods might envy. Your contemplation is interrupted by the arrival of Hermes, who materializes beside you with the casual grace that comes from being the divine messenger. His winged sandals are still smoking slightly from recent use, and he carries the distinctive aura of someone who's been traveling between multiple realms in rapid succession. Quite a discussion in there, he says without preamble, settling onto the terrace's marble railing with the confidence of someone who's never fallen from anything higher than a cloud. I have to admit, I didn't expect Athena's proposal to get as much support as it did. You voted for it, you point out. I voted for trying something different, Hermes corrects. Whether that something turns out to be better than what we have now remains to be seen. But you're right, the current system isn't exactly producing optimal results. He pauses, looking out over the mortal realm with the expression of someone who spends a significant portion of his time traveling through it. Do you know what mortals talk about when they think the gods aren't listening? Everything, I assume. We're not exactly subtle about our surveillance. Hermes laughs, a sound like silver bells caught in a warm breeze. They talk about fairness, not divine justice, not cosmic balance, just simple fairness. They want to understand why good people sometimes suffer while evil people prosper, why hard work doesn't always lead to success, why love doesn't always conquer all. They've constructed entire philosophical systems trying to make sense of a world where the rules keep changing without notice. It's a sobering thought, and one that puts the evening's discussion in a different perspective. The gods have been debating governance structures and intervention protocols, but mortals have been living with the consequences of divine inconsistency for thousands of years. They've developed their own coping mechanisms, their own explanations for why the world works the way it does, and their own methods for finding meaning in circumstances they can't control. Maybe that's the real test, you say, more to yourself than to Hermes. Not whether we can govern them perfectly, but whether we can govern ourselves well enough that they don't have to spend all their time trying to figure out what we want. Now that, Hermes says with genuine appreciation, is either the wisest thing anyone said all evening, or the most naive. Possibly both. Before you can respond, the air around you shimmers with the particular quality of light that announces Artemis's arrival. Your sister appears in a cascade of silver radiance, her hunting bow slung across her shoulder, and her expression carrying the focused intensity that comes from preparing for a night's work. "Brother," she says, nodding to you, before acknowledging Hermes with a polite but distant smile. "I trust the assembly went well. I could hear the shouting from the other side of Olympus." "That wasn't shouting," Hermes protests. "That was vigorous debate. Very different things." When Ares is involved, vigorous debate and shouting tend to be synonymous, Artemis observes dryly. But I'm not here to discuss divine politics. Apollo, we need to coordinate our schedules for the next few days. There's a lunar eclipse coming up, and it's going to require some delicate timing. Right, your regular job, the one that continues regardless of whatever administrative reforms the gods might implement. The sun and moon have been following their appointed paths since the beginning of time, and mortals have built their entire understanding of natural law around the assumption that celestial mechanics are reliable, predictable, and utterly independent of divine mood swings. When, you ask, already mentally calculating the adjustments that will be necessary to your normal route. 3 days from now, just after midnight by mortal reckoning. The eclipse will be visible across most of the Mediterranean, which means every astronomer, astrologer, and amateur skywatcher in the civilized world will be paying attention. If we're even slightly off in our timing, someone will notice. Pause. Lunar eclipses are always complicated, requiring precise coordination between multiple divine domains. You have to dim your residual light at exactly the right moment to allow Earth's shadow to fall across Artemis's moon, while she has to maintain her normal orbital path, despite the temporary interruption to her illumination. Get the timing wrong by even a few minutes, and mortals start assuming the gods are either angry or incompetent. "I'll need to adjust my sunset approach," you tell her. "Come in at a slightly steeper angle to minimize the residual glow. Can you handle the orbital mechanics, Or do you need me to coordinate with the minor deities who manage gravitational forces? I can handle my own moon, thank you, Artemis replies, with the faint irritation that always creeps into her voice when anyone suggests she might need help with her primary responsibilities. Just make sure you're not still radiating solar energy when the eclipse begins. Last time we did this, your chariot horses were glowing bright enough to interfere with the shadow projection. That was 300 years ago, you protest. I've learned better control since then. Have you? Because I seem to recall a certain incident involving a sunrise in Egypt that was so bright it melted several bronze statues. That was different. I was angry about the way they were depicting me in their temple art. Have you seen some of those hieroglyphs? They make me look like I have the head of a bird. Hermes clears his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we could focus on the upcoming eclipse rather than relitigating past artistic disagreements? Artemis nods, her expression becoming more businesslike. The eclipse will last approximately 2 hours, during which time my moon will appear to turn red from the mortal's perspective. It's a natural consequence of atmospheric refraction, but they don't know that. They're going to interpret it as a divine omen, probably a warning about impending war or famine or political upheaval. Do we want them to interpret it that way, you ask? Because if we're implementing new protocols for divine communication, maybe we should start being more intentional about the messages we send. It's a valid point, and one that illustrates the complexity of divine governance in ways that the evening's assembly barely touched on. Every celestial event, every unusual weather pattern, every natural phenomenon that mortals can't easily explain, becomes part of their understanding of divine will. The gods rarely intend these things as communication, but mortals interpret them as such anyway, which means divine actions carry meaning whether the gods want them to or not. The eclipse is going to happen regardless of what we want mortals to think about it, Artemis points out pragmatically. Celestial mechanics don't pause for divine PR considerations, but we could influence how they interpret it by coordinating with other domains. If Demeter ensures good harvests in the weeks following the eclipse, mortals might see it as a positive omen rather than a negative one. Or, Hermes suggests with the slightly mischievous tone that usually precedes his more creative ideas, we could use it as an opportunity to test some of Athena's proposed communication protocols. Instead of letting mortals develop their own interpretations, we could provide official divine guidance through established oracles and temples. The idea has merit, though it would require careful coordination between multiple divine domains and a level of advanced planning that gods aren't traditionally known for. But if the new governance structures are going to work, they'll need to be tested on relatively low-stakes situations before being applied to major crises. I'll discuss it with Father, you decide. If we're serious about implementing structured divine communication, a scheduled celestial event is probably a safer testing ground than waiting for an actual emergency. Artemis nods approvingly. Good thinking, and it would give the mortal astronomers something to do besides complaining that we're not consistent enough in our cosmic timing, as if summoned by the mention of consistency. The air around you begins to shimmer with the distinctive energy signature that announces Zeus's approach. Your father materializes on the terrace in a controlled display of lightning and authority, his expression carrying the particular mix of exhaustion and determination that comes from spending several hours managing divine committee meetings. Children, he says, acknowledging all three of you with a nod that somehow manages to be both paternal and official. I trust you're not out here plotting revolution or starting any new mythological cycles that will require administrative oversight. Just coordinating an eclipse, Father, Artemis replies smoothly. Nothing that should require committee approval under the new protocols. Zeus's expression brightens considerably. Ah, yes. Routine celestial mechanics. Level 1 interventions under Athena's classification system. Proceed as normal, but please document your coordination process for future reference. We're trying to establish best practices for inter-domain collaboration. The fact that Zeus is already thinking in terms of documentation and best practices suggests that the evening's assembly accomplished more than you initially realized. The king of the gods is notorious for preferring intuitive decision-making over systematic analysis, so his embrace of structured procedures represents a significant philosophical shift. How did the working groups conclude, you ask, curious about what specific protocols emerged from all the vigorous debate? Better than expected, actually, Zeus admits, settling onto the terrace railing with the casual confidence of someone who's never worried about falling. We managed to establish preliminary guidelines for most common intervention scenarios, though there are still some contentious areas that will require further discussion, such as romantic interventions. Primarily, Aphrodite insists that matters of love and attraction require immediate, intuitive responses that can't be delayed for committee consultation. Hera argues that romantic interventions have historically caused more problems than they've solved and should require extensive advance approval. Artemis wasn't present to weigh in, but I suspect she'd vote for banning romantic interventions entirely. I would, Artemis confirms without hesitation. Mortal romantic relationships are complicated enough without divine meddling. Every time one of us tries to help someone find love, we end up causing 3 new problems and a minor war. But love is a fundamental force of nature, Hermes points out, unconsciously echoing Aphrodite's earlier argument. Mortals need guidance in matters of the heart just as much as they need guidance in matters of governance or agriculture. Do they, though? You find yourself asking. I mean, they seem to manage romantic relationships reasonably well on their own when we're not interfering. It's only when gods get involved that things turn into epic tragedies with multiple casualties and generational blood feuds. Zeus laughs, a sound like distant thunder rolling across summer hills. That, my son, is exactly the kind of question that's going to make implementing these new protocols much more interesting than anyone anticipated. The conversation continues as the night deepens around you, touching on topics ranging from the practical mechanics of divine committee meetings to the philosophical implications of structured governance for immortal beings. It's the kind of discussion that mortals would find either fascinating or incomprehensible, depending on their tolerance for abstract speculation about cosmic authority. But underlying all the talk of protocols and procedures is a deeper question that none of you quite voice directly. What do gods owe to the mortals who worship them? Is it enough to provide basic cosmic services like sunrise and seasonal change? Or does divine power come with broader responsibilities for mortal welfare and happiness? Different gods, you realize, have very different answers to that question. Some, like Demeter and Hestia, see themselves as nurturing forces whose primary role is to provide for mortal needs. Others, like Ares and Dionysus, view mortals as sources of entertainment whose welfare is secondary to the god's own amusement. Still others, like Athena and yourself, fall somewhere in between, trying to balance divine authority with genuine concern for mortal well-being. The new governance structures might help coordinate divine actions, but they won't resolve the fundamental differences in philosophy that drive those actions. At best, they'll create frameworks for negotiating between competing divine priorities. At worst, they'll bureaucratize divine decision-making without actually improving outcomes for anyone involved. As the discussion gradually winds down and the other gods begin to disperse to their various nocturnal duties, you find yourself alone on the terrace once again, looking out over the mortal world that continues its ancient rhythms, regardless of whatever administrative reforms might be debated in divine halls. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and guide the sun across the sky, just as you have for millennia. Mortals will go about their daily routines of work and love and worry and hope, mostly unaware of the cosmic machinery that makes their existence possible. And somewhere in the space between divine intention and mortal interpretation, the world will continue to turn, carrying its cargo of small lives and large dreams through another day of uncertainty and possibility. The gods may be learning to govern themselves more effectively, but the real test will be whether that improved governance translates into better outcomes for the mortals whose lives hang in the balance of every divine decision. Only time will tell, and for immortal beings, time is the one resource that's never in short supply, even when it feels like it's running out. The silence of the divine terrace stretches around you like a comfortable blanket, broken only by the distant sound of night winds moving through the marble columns of Zeus's palace. Below, the mortal world continues its nocturnal rhythms, and you can sense the quiet activities of millions of humans settling into sleep, tending to sick children, making love, worrying about tomorrow's harvest, or simply staring at the stars and wondering what their lives mean in the vast scheme of things. It's this last group that always captures your attention during these quiet moments. The mortals who look up at the night sky and ask the same questions that gods debate in their assemblies, just with fewer organizational charts and considerably more personal stakes. They wonder about purpose, about fairness, about whether their small actions matter in a universe that seems both infinitely large and intensely personal. You're contemplating this when you become aware of a presence approaching through the divine realm, moving with the particular combination of grace and barely contained energy that could only belong to one goddess. Aphrodite materializes beside you in a cascade of rose-scented light, her expression carrying the mix of amusement and exasperation that usually follows her involvement in family meetings. "Well," she says without preamble, settling beside you with the fluid elegance that makes mortals write poetry and start wars. "That was certainly educational. I had no idea that helping mortals find love required so much paperwork." "The protocols aren't about paperwork," you point out, though you suspect that distinction will matter less in practice than in theory. They're about coordination, making sure our interventions don't work at cross purposes. Aphrodite waves a hand dismissively, and the gesture leaves a brief trail of golden sparkles in the air. "Coordination is just paperwork with better intentions. But I didn't come here to complain about bureaucracy. I came to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." There's something in her tone that makes you pay closer attention. Aphrodite is many things, but she's rarely serious in the way that suggests genuine concern rather than dramatic effect. When she drops the theatrical flourishes and speaks plainly, it usually means she's wrestling with something that goes deeper than her usual domain of romantic entanglements and aesthetic perfection. "Ask away," you tell her, settling more comfortably on the marble railing and preparing for what will probably be a conversation more complex than it initially appears. "Do you think we actually help them?" she asks, her voice carrying none of its usual musical quality. "The mortals, I mean. All our interventions, all our guidance, all our carefully timed miracles and conveniently placed obstacles. Do you think their lives are actually better because we're involved? Or are we just making ourselves feel important while they struggle with problems we created?" It's a question that cuts to the heart of everything you've been thinking about tonight, and it's one that doesn't have easy answers. You've seen mortals whose lives were transformed by divine intervention, young lovers brought together by Aphrodite's influence, who went on to build strong families and contribute to their communities. But you've also seen the casualties, the people caught in the crossfire of divine attention who suffered because they happened to be in the wrong place when gods decided to make a point. "I think," you say slowly, choosing your words carefully, "that we help some of them, some of the time. Whether that's enough to justify the rest of it is a harder question." Aphrodite nods, her expression thoughtful in a way that would surprise mortals who know her only through temple statues and romantic poetry. "I've been thinking about that boy in Corinth, the one you healed earlier today. His mother was so grateful, so relieved. But the woman who cursed him in the first place, she was acting out of pain too. Her daughter's happiness had been threatened by his romantic attachment, and she was protecting her child the only way she knew how, Protecting her child by committing murder? You ask, though you know the situation isn't that simple. Protecting her child by removing a threat to her future, Aphrodite corrects. From her perspective, the boy's feelings for her daughter were going to ruin an advantageous marriage that would secure the family's social position for generations. She saw one person's romantic attachment threatening her entire bloodline's welfare. It's an uncomfortable truth, the kind that makes divine decision-making so much more complex than mortals realize. Every intervention that helps one person inevitably affects others, and those effects ripple outward in ways that even divine foresight can't always predict. Save a life, and you change the trajectory of everyone that life touches. Grant someone's prayer for love, and you alter the romantic landscape for dozens of other people who might have been better suited for the object of that affection. So what do you suggest? You ask. That we stop intervening entirely? Let mortals sort out their own problems without divine guidance? I don't know, Aphrodite admits, and her uncertainty is more unsettling than her usual confidence. But I keep wondering if our interventions are teaching them to be helpless. Every time we solve a problem for them, we rob them of the chance to solve it themselves. Every time we grant a prayer, we reinforce the idea that their own efforts aren't enough. Before you can respond, the air around you shimmers with familiar energy as Hestia appears on the terrace. Your aunt materializes with her characteristic lack of fanfare, her presence bringing a sense of warmth and stability that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the fundamental comfort of home and hearth. I hope I'm not interrupting, she says, settling onto a marble bench with the quiet dignity that makes her simultaneously the most overlooked and most essential of the Olympians. I couldn't help but overhear your discussion, and I thought you might appreciate a different perspective. Hestia's perspectives are always worth hearing, partly because she speaks rarely enough that her words carry weight, and partly because her domain gives her a unique view of mortal life. As the goddess of home and hearth, she sees mortals not in their moments of grand drama or epic struggle, but in their daily routines of cooking meals, tending children, and maintaining the small domestic rituals that actually make civilization possible. Please, Aphrodite says, gesturing for Hestia to continue. I think we could use some wisdom right now. Hestia smiles, the expression carrying the warmth of a perfectly banked fire. You're both asking the right questions, but I think you're approaching them from the wrong angle. You're focusing on whether our interventions help individual mortals, but that's not really the point. She pauses, looking out over the mortal realm with the expression of someone who has spent eternity watching the small, essential activities that keep the world running. Mortals don't need us to solve their problems. They're remarkably good at that when they're allowed to try. What they need from us is consistency, reliability, the assurance that certain fundamental things will continue to work the way they're supposed to. Explain, you say, genuinely curious about where this is leading. Every morning, they wake up knowing that the sun will rise because you guide it across the sky. Every evening, they light their lamps, knowing that fire will behave the way fire is supposed to behave because I maintain the essential nature of flame. Every season, they plant their crops knowing that spring will follow winter because Demeter maintains the cycle of growth and dormancy. Hestia's voice carries the quiet authority that comes from understanding something fundamental about the nature of existence. Those aren't dramatic interventions. They're not grand gestures that make poets weep and historians record epic tales. They're just reliable, predictable, the kind of basic, cosmic infrastructure that mortals take for granted precisely because it works so well. Aphrodite frowns, her expression suggesting she's not entirely convinced. But what about the problems they can't solve themselves? What about injustice, suffering, the kind of pain that comes from circumstances beyond their control? Those are exactly the situations where our interventions cause the most problems. Hestia replies gently. When we step in to fix things that mortals can't fix themselves, we're not just solving immediate problems. We're changing the fundamental rules of their reality. We're teaching them that justice comes from divine favor rather than their own efforts to create fair systems. We're showing them that suffering is something to be avoided through prayer rather than endured with dignity or addressed through communal action. The more she talks, the more you realize that Hestia has been thinking about these questions for much longer than tonight's assembly would suggest. Her perspective isn't shaped by the dramatic interventions that other gods specialize in, but by the steady, unglamorous work of maintaining the basic conditions that make mortal life possible. So you think the new protocols are a mistake, you ask? I think the new protocols are necessary, Hestia corrects, but not for the reasons most of the family believes. We don't need structure to help us intervene more effectively. We need structure to help us resist the urge to intervene when we shouldn't. It's a subtle but important distinction, and one that reframes the entire evening's discussion in a different light. Instead of viewing divine governance as a question of how to manage interventions more efficiently, Hestia is suggesting that the real challenge is learning when not to intervene at all. The hardest part of being a god, she continues, isn't wielding power, it's restraining power. Every prayer we receive, every mortal suffering we witness, every injustice that unfolds in our sight creates pressure to act. But acting isn't always the right choice, even when we have the ability to fix things immediately. Aphrodite shifts uncomfortably, her divine nature clearly rebelling against the idea of restraint when it comes to alleviating suffering. But if we have the power to help and we choose not to use it, aren't we complicit in whatever suffering continues? Are we? Hestia asks in return. Or are we respecting mortals' right to live their own lives, make their own mistakes, and find their own solutions? When we intervene every time something goes wrong, we're essentially telling them that they're incapable of handling their own affairs. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of another presence. This one carrying the distinctive energy signature of controlled chaos that could only belong to Dionysus. Your half-brother materializes with his usual dramatic flair, though something in his expression suggests that tonight's theatricality is more subdued than usual. Family meeting on the terrace? He asks, settling onto the marble with the fluid grace that comes from never being entirely sober or entirely serious. How delightfully cozy. Are we solving the mysteries of the universe or just complaining about the committee assignments? We're discussing the ethics of divine intervention, Aphrodite explains, her tone suggesting she's not entirely sure whether Dionysus's input will be helpful or simply add another layer of complexity to an already complicated conversation. Dionysus laughs, the sound carrying notes of wine and wild music. Ah, the eternal question. Do we help them or let them help themselves? Do we guide them toward happiness or let them stumble toward wisdom? Do we give them what they want or what they need? You make it sound like there's an easy answer, you observe. There is an easy answer, Dionysus replies, his expression becoming unexpectedly serious. The answer is that there is no answer. Not a universal one anyway. Every situation is different. Every mortal is different. Every moment requires its own response. He pauses, looking out over the mortal realm with the expression of someone who has spent considerable time moving through it in disguise, experiencing human life from perspectives that other gods rarely consider. The mortals who worship me, he continues, they're not looking for solutions to their problems. They're looking for moments of transcendence, experiences that lift them out of their ordinary concerns and remind them that life contains possibilities they haven't imagined. Sometimes that comes through wine, sometimes through music, sometimes through the kind of wild celebration that makes respectable people very nervous. Dionysus's domain is unique among the Olympians in that it explicitly involves altering mortal consciousness, temporarily changing how humans perceive and interact with reality. His interventions don't solve problems so much as provide relief from them, creating spaces where mortals can step outside their normal limitations, and experience something approaching divine perspective. But that's temporary, Aphrodite points out. When the wine wears off and the music stops, they're still facing the same problems they had before. True, Dionysus agrees, but they're facing those problems with the knowledge that transcendence is possible, that their current limitations aren't permanent, that reality contains more possibilities than their daily experience suggests. That knowledge changes how they approach everything else. It's an interesting perspective, and one that suggests a different model for divine intervention. Instead of solving mortal problems directly, gods might focus on expanding mortal consciousness, providing experiences and insights that help humans develop their own problem-solving capabilities. So you're saying we should focus on inspiration rather than intervention, you ask? I'm saying we should focus on being gods rather than cosmic social workers, Dionysus replies with a grin that somehow manages to be both mischievous and profound. Mortals don't need us to micromanage their lives. They need us to be something greater than they are, something that reminds them of possibilities beyond their immediate circumstances. Hestia nods approvingly. That's actually quite wise, nephew. And it aligns with what I was saying about consistency and reliability. When we focus on maintaining the fundamental nature of our domains, rather than constantly intervening in specific situations, we provide mortals with a stable foundation they can build upon. But what about genuine emergencies? Aphrodite asks, clearly still struggling with the idea of restraint when faced with mortal suffering. What about situations where people will die if we don't act? Define emergency, Hestia says gently. Mortals die every day from disease, accident, violence, old age. Death is part of their natural cycle, just as birth is. If we intervene every time someone might die, we're not preventing emergencies, we're preventing mortality itself. Which brings us back to the fundamental question, you realize. What do we owe them? Safety, happiness, justice, or simply the conditions that make it possible for them to pursue those things themselves? The question hangs in the air between you, unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable. Each god present represents a different aspect of divine responsibility, a different relationship with mortal welfare, a different understanding of what it means to be worthy of worship. As the night deepens around you, the conversation gradually shifts from philosophical speculation to practical concerns. Tomorrow's duties still need to be managed, regardless of whatever revelations about divine responsibility might emerge from late-night discussions on marble terraces. Artemis will need to complete her lunar journey, maintaining the careful orbital mechanics that keep the night sky predictable and navigable. Aphrodite will return to her endless work of managing the complex emotional networks that bind mortal communities together through love, attraction, and the occasional dramatic romantic disaster. Dionysus will continue his eternal mission of providing mortals with experiences that transcend their ordinary limitations, whether through wine, art, or the kind of wild celebration that makes philosophers nervous and poets ecstatic. And you'll wake tomorrow morning to guide the sun across the sky once again, providing the light and warmth that makes mortal life possible, while wrestling with questions about the proper scope of divine responsibility that have no clear answers. Perhaps that's the real lesson of tonight's discussions. Gods, despite their unlimited power and immortal perspective, are still learning how to balance authority with wisdom, intervention with restraint, love with respect for mortal autonomy. The new protocols and governance structures might help coordinate divine actions, but they won't resolve the fundamental tensions that make those actions necessary in the first place. What they might do, however, is create space for the kind of thoughtful reflection that transforms reactive intervention into deliberate choice. Instead of responding to every crisis with immediate action, the gods might learn to pause, consider, consult with each other, and choose responses that serve long-term mortal welfare rather than short-term divine impulses. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a step towards something that might eventually resemble wisdom. And for immortal beings with unlimited time to refine their approach, even small steps toward wisdom are worth taking. The conversation continues as the night wears on, touching on topics ranging from the practical mechanics of divine committee meetings to the philosophical implications of cosmic responsibility. It's the kind of discussion that would either fascinate or overwhelm mortals, depending on their tolerance for abstract speculation about the nature of power and the proper relationship between gods and the humans who worship them. But underlying all the theoretical discussion is a deeper recognition that being a god is both simpler and more complicated than it appears from the outside. Simpler because divine power makes many problems easy to solve. More complicated because that same power makes it difficult to know when solving problems is actually the right thing to do. As the first hints of dawn begin to appear on the eastern horizon, you realize that your break from cosmic responsibilities is coming to an end. Soon, you'll need to return to the divine stables, harness your horses, and begin another day's journey across the sky. The mortals below are beginning to stir, starting their daily routines with the unconscious assumption that the sun will rise on schedule, that the fundamental forces of nature will continue to operate as they always have, that the gods who govern their world will continue to do so with at least some degree of consistency and wisdom. It's both a tremendous responsibility and a profound act of faith on their part. They trust the gods to maintain the basic conditions that make mortal life possible, even though they have no real understanding of how that maintenance works or what it costs in terms of divine time and energy. Perhaps that trust is the real foundation of the relationship between gods and mortals. Not the dramatic interventions that make for epic poetry, not the miraculous rescues that become the stuff of legend, but the quiet, reliable, day-after-day work of keeping the world running smoothly enough that mortals can focus on the important business of being human. As you prepare to leave the terrace and return to your duties, you find yourself thinking about the mortal you helped earlier, the young man whose life you saved by unraveling a curse that would have killed him slowly and painfully. Tomorrow, he'll wake up healthy and whole, probably with no memory of how close he came to death. He'll go about his daily routine, pursue his romantic interests, build his life according to his own choices and desires. He'll never know that a god spent part of the night thinking about him, wondering whether saving his life was the right choice, questioning the ethics of intervention and the proper scope of divine responsibility. He'll simply live, which is perhaps the greatest gift the gods can offer, the opportunity for mortals to be fully, completely, unconsciously human. The sun doesn't rise itself, after all, but it rises reliably, predictably, beautifully, because someone takes the time and effort to make sure it does. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. As you walk back toward the divine stables where your horses are waiting, you carry with you the questions raised during tonight's discussions, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow's sunrise won't solve the complex ethical problems of divine governance, but it will provide light and warmth to millions of mortals who are counting on that light to make their own lives possible. Sometimes the most profound acts of love are the ones that go unnoticed, the reliable presence that creates space for others to flourish. Gods may debate the proper scope of intervention, but the fundamental act of showing up, day after day, to maintain the conditions that make mortal life possible is perhaps the most important service they can provide. The eastern sky is beginning to show the first faint traces of colour that herald the approach of dawn. Time to harness the horses, take up the reins, and begin another day's journey across the sky. The mortals are counting on it, even if they don't realize it. And gods who are worthy of that trust don't let them down. Not today. Not ever. Tomorrow arrives as it always does, not with fanfare or announcement, but with the quiet certainty of cosmic routine. Your horses are waiting in the divine stables, their flames dim and sleepy in the pre-dawn darkness, but ready to burn bright when called upon. They nicker softly as you approach, recognizing the sound of your footsteps on marble floors. that never quite grow cold. As you harness them with reins made of crystallized sunlight, you find yourself thinking about the conversations from the night before. The questions that seem so urgent in the darkness don't disappear with the coming dawn, but they do shift, becoming part of the background hum of divine consciousness, rather than the sharp, immediate concerns that demand immediate resolution. This is perhaps the most profound difference between gods and mortals: the luxury of time to consider, to reflect, to let ideas settle and mature like wine aging in amphora, buried deep in cool earth. Mortals must make their decisions quickly, with incomplete information and under pressure from circumstances that won't wait for perfect wisdom. Gods can afford to be patient, to let understanding develop gradually through experience rather than demanding immediate answers to questions that have puzzled thinking beings since consciousness first looked up at the stars and wondered why. Your horses leap into the sky with renewed energy, their flames brightening as they respond to your command. Below, the mortal world spreads out in the familiar patterns of civilization and wilderness, order and chaos, the eternal human struggle to impose meaning on a universe that offers beauty and terror in equal measure. But today, something feels different. Not dramatically different, not the kind of cosmic shift that would send poets racing for their scrolls and astrologers consulting their charts. Just a subtle change in the quality of attention you bring to your work, a deeper awareness of the weight and wonder of what you do. Every ray of light that streams from your chariot carries with it the possibility of life, growth, understanding. Every shadow you cast provides relief from heat, space for rest, the gentle darkness that makes sleep possible. You are not just moving the sun across the sky. You are conducting a daily symphony of light and shadow that makes mortal existence not just possible but beautiful. As your horses climb toward their zenith, you become aware of the prayers rising from the world below. They come in dozens of languages, from temples grand and humble, from private homes and public squares, from the lips of children who have learned to whisper thanks for sunshine, and the voices of elderly people who have lived long enough to know that light, like life itself, is never guaranteed. Most of these prayers are simple expressions of gratitude, the kind of routine acknowledgement that mortals offer to forces beyond their understanding. But scattered among them are the deeper pleas, the desperate requests that carry the weight of genuine need. A farmer praying for clear skies during harvest, a mother asking for warmth to help her sick child recover, a sailor hoping for visibility to navigate safely home. Under the old system, you might have responded to each of these individually, making small adjustments to weather patterns, providing extra warmth where needed, ensuring that clouds didn't block the sun at crucial moments. But tonight's discussions have left you thinking differently about intervention, about the difference between helping and enabling, between divine mercy and divine wisdom. Instead of responding to each specific request, you focus on providing consistent, reliable service. The sun moves across the sky at its appointed pace, neither faster nor slower than the eternal rhythm that mortals have learned to depend upon. The light is warm but not overwhelming, bright but not blinding, steady but not monotonous. It is, in its own way, a prayer answered before it was spoken, the assurance that some things in an uncertain world can be counted upon to remain constant. This doesn't mean ignoring mortal suffering or remaining indifferent to genuine need. When you notice storm clouds gathering over a region where farmers are struggling to bring in their harvest, you allow your light to penetrate more deeply, creating breaks in the weather that provide opportunities for work to continue. When you see a ship lost in fog, you intensify your radiance just enough to burn through the mist without disrupting the broader weather patterns that other mortals depend upon. These are small interventions, subtle adjustments that work with natural forces rather than overriding them. They require more skill than dramatic displays of divine power, more wisdom than simple problem solving. They are the kind of help that supports mortal efforts rather than replacing them. that enhances human capability rather than making it unnecessary. As the day progresses, you find yourself noticing things that previously escaped your attention. The way farmers pause in their work to wipe sweat from their brows, then look up at your chariot with expressions of resigned acceptance rather than complaint. The way children play in the shadows cast by buildings, using the interplay of light and darkness as part of their games. The way elderly people seek out sunny spots to sit and talk, allowing your warmth to ease the aches that come with long years of mortal existence. These observations don't lead to interventions, but they do deepen your understanding of what it means to be truly helpful rather than simply powerful. The mortals below aren't asking you to solve their problems. They're asking you to provide the consistent conditions that make it possible for them to solve problems themselves. The farmer sweating in the fields isn't praying for you to harvest his crops. He's grateful for the light that makes the work possible and the warmth that ripens the grain. The children playing in the shadows aren't asking you to eliminate darkness. They're enjoying the contrast that makes their games interesting. The elderly people seeking sunny spots aren't demanding that you banish all discomfort from their lives. They're appreciating the simple pleasure of warmth on aged bones. This is perhaps the most profound lesson from the previous night's discussions, that mortals are far more resilient, creative, and capable than gods often give them credit for. They don't need cosmic babysitters or divine problem solvers. They need reliable partners, consistent supporters, trustworthy allies in the ongoing work of being human in a universe that offers both wonder and challenge in abundance. As your chariot approaches the western horizon for another day, you reflect on how this new understanding might change your approach to divine responsibility. The protocols and procedures discussed in last night's assembly suddenly seem less important than the deeper shift in perspective they represent. From seeing mortals as subjects to be managed to recognizing them as partners in the great work of making existence meaningful. The sun sets because you guide it below the horizon, but it rises each morning because mortals believe it will, because they structure their lives around that expectation, because they have faith that some things in an uncertain world can be depended upon. Your reliability makes their planning possible. Their trust makes your service meaningful. It's a partnership older than civilization, deeper than worship, more fundamental than any protocol or procedure that gods might devise to regulate their own behavior. It's the basic compact between divine power and mortal faith. We will maintain the conditions that make your lives possible, and you will use those conditions to create meaning, beauty, and purpose that even immortal beings can admire and learn from. As the last rays of sunlight fade from the mortal sky and Artemis prepares to begin her own nocturnal journey, you find yourself looking forward to tomorrow's sunrise with renewed appreciation for the work you do. Not because it's dramatic or heroic or likely to be remembered in epic poetry, but because it's necessary, reliable, and quietly beautiful in the way that all essential services become beautiful when performed with skill and dedication. The gods may still be learning how to govern themselves wisely, but the real governance happens every day in the small acts of service that keep the world running smoothly enough for mortals to pursue their own dreams of wisdom, justice, and happiness. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's everything. The stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, each one a distant sun providing light and warmth to worlds you'll never see, maintained by gods whose names you'll never know, serving mortals whose prayers you'll never hear. It's a reminder that the work you do is part of something larger than individual glory or personal satisfaction. The vast, patient, eternal effort to make existence possible for conscious beings who look up at the sky and dare to hope that tomorrow will be better than today. Tomorrow will arrive as it always does, with the quiet certainty of cosmic routine and the endless possibility of mortal dreams. And you'll be there to meet it, reins in hand, horses ready to leap into the sky, carrying light to a world that trusts you to show up even when nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. That trust, perhaps, is the most divine thing of all.